Good Friday morning, everyone, and thank you for tuning in to yet another weekly Friday edition of the Alan Fitz podcast, also known as The Chat. Hello out there. My name is Alan Fitz. I am the host for the show this morning, and welcome into the program live from our studios right here in Amarillo, Texas. Folks, we're going to be talking about something. And if you have followed my podcast a couple of years ago, we talked about some of the confusion about the Texas gun laws here across the Lone Star. And we're going to revisit this today on the podcast. But I want to start off before I get started, as I always do. We want to welcome in those three main listening audiences, as we always have. Number one, those that do agree with what we say here on the show, and they leave very positive remarks across different platforms on social media. The number two listening audience is those that don't quite agree with everything that we say, but they do leave positive criticism. And always, last but not least, the haters out there. They can't find anything positive because they can't see the forest for the trees. And they'll always be blind to anything good that's reported on. So we want to welcome in everyone to the show. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we've been, as we always do, we kind of keep an eyeball on local news stories, statewide news across Texas, and we have noticed that there was an uptick last year where people have repeatedly, not just the same person, but just people in general, have been arrested over and over and over. And we're talking about licensed carriers here in Texas, licensed to carry by the DPS of Texas, getting arrested for carrying a prohibited weapon, places carrying like carrying of a gun, things of that sort. Mainly to break that down for you in layman's terms, it is the unlawful possession of a firearm. And a lot of these people, believe this or not, are licensed carriers. There's a lot of them that are constitutional open carriers and things like that. And there seems to be, with this uptick, we've done some research on this, and it appears that there's some confusion with the gun laws here in Texas. So I want to revisit this subject on the show for this morning, and maybe I can help clarify a little bit more about where you can and cannot carry weapons, and also depending on your behavior uh, when you can't get caught with a firearm. I want to first of all start off by letting everybody out there know, according to the Texas Penal Code, the unlawful possession of a firearm is a Class A misdemeanor. Now, we're not talking about a felon out there. Felons cannot legally possess firearms, they cannot legally possess ammunition, although there is a stipulation behind that, and we'll get into that a little bit later here on the podcast. But let me talk a little bit about where this uptick has been happening across the Lone Star. And then we're going to get into places actually where you absolutely cannot carry, whether you are licensed or not, whether you're constitutional conceal or open carry. And we're going to discuss a few other things as well as the podcast continues on. But let me, and I think what we're seeing here on a uh, lot of the news articles that we've been reading, we've been noticing across the Lone Star here where people are getting arrested, and it's mainly for driving while intoxicated (DWI), and they receive two charges. And I'm going to break this down for you, and then we're going to talk about some of this signage that is confusing to everyone. So to start the program off this morning, let me explain why a lot of this seems to be happening here across Texas. When, well, let me say this: when open constitutional carry actually uh, was implemented, it did away with a lot of the signages that you see, especially with uh, establishments that are legally licensed to sell beer, wine, and distill spirits. But where the new law actually came in, we're going to have to back up to when license to carry was first passed in Texas. And a lot of people really didn't check into this. All they knew is that Governor Greg Abbott had signed a new law in force that stated that if you were licensed to carry, that you could carry on your person, and it had to be in a holster. No Mexican carry, nothing like that. And I'll explain what that is here in a few minutes. But basically, what you had to do is you had to find someone that was certified to teach the course, and then you had to be go through a proficiency training, shooting targets and things like that, and pay a fee. And then the DPS would run all these background checks, federal background checks through the FBI, and all that good stuff. And then they would send you what was called an LTC that you carried with your driver's license. It looked just like a driver's license, but it said license to carry at the top instead of driver's license. Now, what a lot of people really didn't understand at that point is there was an additional law, folks, that was passed that a lot of folks, well, they really didn't know about it. And, it's not law enforcement's responsibility to tell you about this because it goes back to the old saying, ignorance is no defense. But basically, what that law talked about is that if you are out and about, and we're even talking about if you're in your own vehicle, car, truck, motorcycle, whatever the case may be, and you have a firearm. Now, the firearm does not necessarily have to be on your person. It can be concealed in your vehicle, in the glove box, the console, under the seat, concealed out of sight, whatever the case may be. And what a lot of folks didn't understand was they didn't read all of what was in the small type of the law, so to speak, across Texas. And what that law talks about is that you, as an individual, whether, and back at that time, you had to be licensed to carry a firearm on your person. Now, you didn't necessarily have to be licensed to carry it in your vehicle because years ago, then Texas Governor Rick Perry signed what was known as the Motorist Protection Act, which allowed qualified individuals, and what I mean by qualified, they could not be convicted of a felony because you can't be in possession as a convicted felon. But what the Motorist Protection Act did, it allowed you to carry concealed in your vehicle, which actually bumped up a law that has been in effect for many, many years, the traveling law in Texas, which never did mention how many counties or how many miles that you had to drive to be considered traveling. Uh, a lot of people took upon themselves saying, well, three counties away, now you're traveling. And they never did go back and word this thing. It was very, very vague. It still is in the language. But Governor Perry then passed again called the Motorist Protection Act, which allowed a qualified individual to legally carry a firearm concealed in their vehicle while they're traveling from point A to point B. Now, this law now still is in effect, but with concealed carry, open carry, license to carry, constitutional carry, it kind of coincides with what the law already states. But this is what a lot of people don't understand and may not even know, ladies and gentlemen. I'm here to clarify this. When license to carry was passed in Texas, there was a clause in that language that stated that if you were engaged in any activity other than a simple traffic violation, and the word simple does not appear in Texas law, it just basically states other than a traffic violation. And we're talking about a Class C misdemeanor, that you could be charged as a Class A misdemeanor with the unlawful carry of a weapon. So this would go back and coincide of why a lot of people in some of these news articles that we have read over the past year, dating back to the early 2025, that were lit up by law enforcement, and they were drunk. Okay, they were inebriated, they were intoxicated, whatever you want to call it, soused, whatever your wording is. And upon the arrest of driving while intoxicated, that gives the officer probable cause to search the vehicle. During that search, they come up with a firearm in the vehicle. Now you pick up an additional charge for unlawfully carrying a weapon, because a DWI, especially the first one here in Texas, is a Class B misdemeanor. Okay, it's just a simple DWI. Well, it's above a Class C misdemeanor, but it's not just a traffic violation, it's a criminal offense. So, this is why you are seeing this uptick in Texas, because that is something, a driving while intoxicated, folks, is that's a whole lot different than getting pulled over for a speeding violation. Okay, so basically, what I'm clarifying to you is that if you are traveling in your vehicle, you have a firearm. And again, you can be wearing that firearm, you can have that firearm concealed on your person, or simply enough that you could just have it concealed in your vehicle. But this only applied to a licensed carrier. Now, this was before constitutional carry was passed, and this is where a lot of people are getting confused on this law. This applies to licensed carriers in Texas. So you're out, let's say for an example, you're leaving Amarillo and maybe you're going to visit family down in Childress, a couple hours away. And let's say that you come to Memphis, Texas, and you're driving too fast. And let's say a Memphis PD officer pulls you over and writes you a ticket. Now, by Texas law, you are not required to identify that you have a weapon in your vehicle. However, if a law enforcement officer, and you're making, again, this is professional contact, ladies and gentlemen, an officer pulls you over for a traffic violation and he asks you, do you have a weapon in your vehicle? You must say, yes, you do, if you do. That is required by law. Failure to properly answer that question, you are subject to arrest and additional criminal offense charges filed. All right, now let's get back to to the original story here. So you're pulled over for speeding, and the officer asks you if you have a weapon in your vehicle, or you're open carrying that weapon, and he sees that weapon and he chooses not to disarm you. Once the checks have been ran on you, the warrant checks. They're running 27, 28s, 29s on you. Driver license checks, license plate stolen checks, and checking to see if you have any outstanding warrants. Then at that given time, you will be issued that citation. You will sign that citation and you'll be free to go. Okay. You have not committed an offense of unlawfully carrying of a weapon because you haven't done anything above the grade, if you will, above the grade of a traffic offense. Now, if he pulls you over and you're drunk and he arrests you for it and they find a weapon in your vehicle as a licensed carrier, then you are subject to being charged with unlawfully carrying of a weapon. Now, we're going to take a couple of minutes to explain to you how that weapon must be carried, especially if it's on your person. Texas law requires your weapon to be in a holster. We're not talking about Mexican carry. Now, a Mexican carry, that is a Class A misdemeanor. And what that is sticking a gun in your waistband without a holster. Now, the law doesn't say that the holster must be attached to anything. It simply states that it must be in a holster or a shoulder holster. Mexican carry is where you stick a gun down in the waist of your pants without a holster. That is a Class A misdemeanor and is constituted as unlawfully carrying of a weapon. You could avoid that charge if it's ever happened to you by simply putting it in a holster. So Mexican carry is not allowed. And they use the term Mexican carry. That's not the term I'm using. If you've ever watched old Clint Eastwood movies and those John Wayne movies, when they have the Mexicans on there and they're fighting against them, or they've been taken hostage or something, the Mexicans walk around with the sombreros and the rotted teeth and about half drunk and a tequila bottle in one pocket and the gun stuck down in their waist. That is the terminology of Mexican carry. That is illegal here in Texas. Now, a lot of people may be asking yourself, well, I don't have a license to carry. I'm constitutional carry. Does that unlawful carrying of a weapon apply to me? Yes, indeed, it does. Folks, basically, what I'm telling you is even though you're not a licensed carrier, you still have to go by the same rules set forth by the licensed carriers. Now, let's back up a little bit. And you'll remember me talking earlier about okay, so you got stopped for speeding. That is a Class C misdemeanor. Theoretically, under something called TLE. That stands for Traffic Law Enforcement. Now, let me break something down to you to where you do not get confused when we're talking about Class C misdemeanors. Let's say, for an example, that you are carrying a weapon on your person. It doesn't have to be open carry, it can be concealed, it doesn't matter. It's on your person. And let's say that you get into a verbal altercation with an individual. Now, depending on how far that verbal altercation takes place, could get you arrested on a Class A misdemeanor for unlawfully carrying of a weapon. Let's say that the disturbance gets loud, someone decides to call the police, the cops show up, and it becomes disorderly conduct. Now, where disorderly conduct is still legally defined as a Class C misdemeanor in Texas, which is only punishable by fine, and that's up to $500. If you were arrested for disorderly conduct or any Class C, Class B, Class A felony, you would also be looking at an offense for unlawfully carrying of a weapon. I know it's a Class C misdemeanor, and a lot of people get confused on that because a traffic violation for speeding, maybe a license plate light burned out at night. Let's say you have a tail light burned out, a brake light, a headlight. That is a traffic violation. Yes, it's a Class C misdemeanor, but it's still only a traffic violation. It doesn't say except on Class C misdemeanors. It says you can travel with that weapon, and if you're pulled over, technically you are not you're not committing a separate offense of unlawfully carrying a weapon if it's just a traffic violation. You get pulled over for DWI, that's a Class B misdemeanor if it's your first one. It's a Class A if it's your second one. You've got a weapon in your vehicle. Then, yes, that is a separate offense that you're committing by having a weapon in your possession, basically. And even though it's concealed in your vehicle and you're in that vehicle, that is still considered possession. Okay. Or let's say you just got through robbing a bank and you get pulled over by the state troopers. They pull guns on you. You get arrested for bank robbery. They find a weapon in the vehicle. That's an additional offense for unlawfully carrying of a weapon. So keep this in mind when you're carrying a firearm. You have to watch your behavior. And only if it's just a simple traffic violation, you have not committed an additional offense. Let's talk a little bit about, and I'm going to go ahead and bring this back up again because it was a chat program, excuse me, about 3 years ago that I did, and I want to go ahead and kind of refresh your memory, or for those out there that have never really checked into the gun laws and you're kind of curious to know where you can carry and where you cannot carry, and all these confusing signs that you see. I'm going to go ahead and break that down for you and explain what to be on the lookout for. Now, carrying by license, carrying constitutionally, there are a few signs that you need to be on the lookout for. I'm going to explain what those signs are, and then I'm going to get into places that technically carry is prohibited, but then again, is it really prohibited? Okay. It's due to signs. And we'll get to that here in a little bit. But the signs that commonly you are looking for is there's four different types. You have what is called 30 5, 30 6, 30 7, and 42.03. And I'll go ahead and tell you what each of those signs mean. We're going to start off with 30 6. Okay, 30 6 was the original signs that came out uh, in the state when license to carry was passed. And basically, when all of this took place, especially when open carry, constitutional carry, was implemented into Texas, in that bill, uh, Governor Greg Abbott, it was added in, and this was the governor said this was the only way he would sign this, but it was added into the language that private property owners had the right to restrict individuals or an individual from entering their business either concealed or openly carrying a firearm. I'll give you a classic example here in a moment, but let's get back to the numbers of those signs and I'll break them down what they mean. 30 6, that's 30.06, written both in English and in Spanish, is the sign that restricts an individual that is concealing a weapon on their person from entering that business. 30 7 is the sign that is posted in always a conspicuous place, and it's generally the entrance of a business, along with 30-06, that restricts an individual from coming into that business openly carrying a weapon. 30-05 is the sign that overrides both 30-06 and 30-07, that talks about weapons are prohibited in the establishment, and 4203 basically overrides everything, but it's basically used in governmental functions such as courthouses and things like that. And we're going to get a little bit more into detail as the podcast continues. But let me give you an example of the 30-06, 30-07. Pinky's Liquor Store, right over here, just off of Georgia and Donovan Circle, like at Blackburn Street, to be precise. Now, I don't know about the other Pinky stores here across Amarillo, but I will tell you that Pinky's Liquor Store, right there on Blackburn Street, over there behind Home Depot, has a sign on their door. It's 30-07. And that 30-07 sign talks about you can't come in here if you're openly carrying a firearm. It doesn't say anything about concealed carry. So if you are concealed carry, you can legally go into that liquor store, and no, you do not have to be licensed. We're going to get into that here in a little while. Even though you see those blue and white signs out there, those blue and white signs are not valid anymore. We're going to get a little bit into that as the program goes on. But anyway, getting back to the Pinky's Liquor Store, you cannot go in that establishment openly carrying a firearm, but you can conceal it while you're in there. If you conceal a weapon correctly, no one knows you have it anyway. Some businesses restrict concealed carry, so they will post the 30-06 sign out in the front of their business, which means you can legally go in openly carrying. Okay, 30 out, 30-06, 30-07, and 30-05, and sometimes you will find 4203. Generally, is used in hospitals, uh, doctors' offices, freestanding emergency clinics, and courthouses. Now, let me break down something that really is causing confusion with people across Texas. There are some courthouses in Texas that do allow you to legally carry in the front door. Now, it's after you go through the metal detector and all that good stuff. But there are some courthouses in Texas that actually restrict you from coming in through the front door, whether openly carried or concealed on your person. And I'm going to break down why this is. First of all, and this is places where weapons are prohibited. This is the 4203. It also coincides. Basically, 30-05 overrides both 30-06 and 30-07, but 4203 overrides everything. And basically, what the situation is on this is that the reason that courthouses in Texas do not allow you to carry a weapon through the entrance doors is because the courthouse has offices that is a court of record. For an example, the county clerk, the district clerk. Now, I can tell you that there are some courthouses that do allow you to come in the courthouse, but only in a specific area of the courthouse. One courthouse that I can expressly tell you about, and I'm sure most people already know this that live in the East Texas area. But for those of you that don't, the Shelby County Courthouse in Center, Texas will allow you to come in on the ground floor only, concealed or openly carrying. And it allows you to walk into the license plate office where you renew your registration on your vehicle, but you are restricted from getting in the elevator and going upstairs because the courtrooms are upstairs. That is a court of record. Now, one of the confusing things about the Shelby County Courthouse is that the county clerk's office is right there next to the license plate office. So, to alleviate this confusion, it depends on how you interpret what you read, ladies and gentlemen. Some people read something and interpret it differently than what the other person that comes behind you would read and interpret. But under Texas state law, you cannot carry in a courthouse, period, because it is a court of record. It doesn't matter what floor the courtrooms are located, or it doesn't matter what floor the county clerk or the district clerk are located in. It's actually a violation of the law, period, to walk into a courthouse in Texas with any kind of weapon on your person. That is places where weapons prohibited. Now, there is a loophole to that law. If the signs are not posted at the entrance doors, then yes, you legally may enter the courthouse through the doors that they allow the general public to come through. In the case of the Shelby County Courthouse, the 30-05, the 30-06, and the 4203 are found on the ground level at the elevators. This is where it becomes different. Now, here at Amarillo on the Potter County side, I'm not sure about Randall County, that's down in Canyon, but downtown Amarillo, the Potter County Courthouse, no, you cannot carry, period. No, there are not signs posted. The county, either the county judge or the district judge has signed an executive order that overrides them from putting those signs on the door. But then again, you're saying, well, Alan, you're contradicting yourself. You just said if the signs weren't posted, they can come in. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm here to tell you right now, it is still illegal for you to enter any courthouse in Texas with a weapon on your person. It is a state law. You cannot do it. In the case of the Shelby County Courthouse in Center, it is what they are reading and how they're interpreting what they're reading. County judge, the district judge cannot override state law that is already in place. What they're doing is they are not interpreting what is correctly written, and they're allowing you to go in places like that. The Harrison County Courthouse in Marshall, Texas, it's exactly the same way. You can walk in the front door and you have to take a left to go into the license plate office. If you take a right, you meet a deputy. You have to go through the body scanner. You've got a weapon on your person, places where weapons prohibited. Now you have committed an offense. Other places that are prohibited from you going, and folks, we're talking about prohibited 100%. It doesn't matter if you are a licensed carrier or you are a constitutional carrier. This is places where weapons are prohibited. A sheriff's office, technically, by state law, says that you cannot go in there if it is coined the term a jail. There is a difference between a sheriff's office in Texas and a county jail. Sometimes the sheriff's department houses prisoners, and sometimes they don't. In a case that the sheriff's department has the jail somewhere in the building, yes, Texas law states that it is prohibited to go in there. But because constitutional carry was passed, they have to post those signs as well. They would have to have a 30-06, a 30-07, a 30-05, or a 4203. Otherwise, yes, you can legally walk in there. Now, where you can't go is back in the jail populated area where the prisoners are kept. That is a felony, ladies and gentlemen. You cannot go. That's a secured area of a correctional facility. Cannot go in that area. But to walk in through the front doors, if they do not have the signage posted, and I'm not talking about a sign that says weapons prohibited beyond this point, and it's something they printed off on a printer with a circle and a red line through a pistol. That is not legal language terminology. It has to be black and white, 1 inch black letters on a white background, both in English and in Spanish. So if, say, your local sheriff's office does not have that proper language, signage language, if you will, posted at the entrance doors, then yes, legally you can walk in and no, you cannot be arrested for that. Now, they can tell you to leave. If you don't leave, then it can become a trespass issue. But without the signage, they can't enforce anything. Another place, and we're talking strictly places where weapons prohibited, schools and educational institutions. Okay. Now, you cannot have a firearm on your person, on any premise of any public or private school, including school buses and during any school sponsored activities. It also applies to post secondary educational institutions unless you have express written consent of the superintendent. Polling places. Let's talk a little bit about that. On the day of polling, and we're not, the law does not say early voting, it does not say primary, it says voting. Let's say, for an example, that your courthouse would allow you to walk in the main entrance with a firearm, concealed or openly, doesn't matter. They don't have any signage posted. But on the day of a polling location, let's say that precinct one box is inside that location. Let's say it's right next door to the license plate officer, wherever it may be stationed on the first floor. Now it's prohibited. You can't walk in there. That is a felony to do that. Okay. Places where weapons prohibited basically breaks down to a felony offense, period. So you cannot carry on the premise of a polling place. That, now let me clarify something before some of you get yourself in trouble. If a polling place is located inside of a courthouse, you cannot legally even come onto the courthouse grounds with a firearm on your person. Period. That is considered the premise of a voting location. So that is a weapons prohibited. That's considered a polling place. You also cannot go into an amusement park or any type of sporting events during an active high school, collegiate, or professional sporting event. Let's say that you're walking around up north of the boulevard on the Dumas Highway and you want to just stop in at Wonderland Amusement Park. Of course, you can't get in because the gates are closed, but you want to walk up to the gate, maybe take some pictures, and you're openly carrying a weapon. At that given moment, that is legal because that amusement park is not open. But during the time that it's in operation, no, you cannot even go up on the premises of an amusement park. Here's something, and I don't know how many people have actually tried this and been able to come back and say, well, this is where it was at, and I did it, and there was not a problem. Let's talk about an airport just a moment. Here in Amarillo, we have one major international airport, and then we have a small airport. Trade Winds is a very small airport over on the Randall County side, and then we have Rick Husband International Airport, Amarillo, out on Airport Drive on the Potter County side. Can you, let's say that your mother-in-law, we'll just say she flew in from Chicago, Illinois, and she brought in a lot of luggage, and you go into the airport to retrieve her luggage off the turnstile, and you forget and you have your weapon on you. And maybe it comes exposed, you bent over, your coat pulled up, airport police sees it. Can you be arrested for that? No, you cannot. As long as you're not in a secured area of the airport. Weapons are strictly prohibited in secured areas of airport terminals beyond the screening checkpoint. So, if you've ever wondered, can you carry a firearm into an airport? Yes, you can, unless, again, signage is posted. The thing to keep in mind if you're going to carry a weapon, taking somebody to the airport, picking them up from the airport, whatever the case may be, is do not go past a TSA checkpoint because airports look at that. Now it's in the secured area. You've gone through security. They've X-rayed you. They've patted you down. They've shaked you down. They've gone through your purse, your luggage, or whatever the case may be. It's all been X-rayed. You have gone through the body scanner. Now you are in a secured area of an airport. Now that's places where weapons prohibited. So no, you cannot get on an airplane with a weapon. Only a federal air marshal, ladies and gentlemen, is allowed to do that. Another place that a lot of people may not know this, and you see this sign commonly here around Amarillo, especially down in the downtown dining establishments that we have. You will pull up to a parking spot, and you'll get out, and you'll go up to the front door, and you may see a sign on that door that has a red 51% on it. It does not matter whether you are a licensed carrier or you are a constitutional carrier. You cannot enter that establishment if the red 51% sign is visible at the entrance. And let me explain, folks, what that red 51% sign is. A red 51% sign means that the business derives 51% or greater of alcohol sales over food sales. So basically, the only people that can walk past that point would be law enforcement. And the law doesn't necessarily state that they have to be in uniform, they don't have to be active, because we all know law enforcement carries their weapon, their off duty weapon on them when they're off duty. They would be exempt from that sign, but this is something that is set through the Texas Alcoholic and Beverage Commission. That is who is issuing that sign. They have looked at the sales, not necessarily audited the establishment, but in sales that are reported to the state uh, that business itself is selling more alcohol than they are food. Just to break it down into layman's terms, that's what that means. So the business is deriving 51% or greater in alcohol sales over food sales. And generally, in a 51% red signage, that's distilled spirits are being sold, hard liquor. Uh, honestly, and it may exist, folks, but personally, I have never seen an establishment that sells beer and wine with food that would have a 51% sign. I think that is strictly solely on an establishment that sells distilled spirits. So, but again, if you've ever seen that, and you are a premium member to our a premium subscriber rather to our webpage that attaches itself to this podcast, you'll see my contact email on that page. Shoot me the information and send me some pictures of that. I'd like to see that because I've never seen it before. But again, that's what the 51% sign means is they're deriving 51% of liquor sales over their food sales. Now, let's talk a little bit about this signage, this blue and white signage. And I think when constitutional carry in Texas first came out, law enforcement across the Lone Star was a little bit confused about this. And I think as time has gone on, they have become more educated, if you will, about this. And I want to go ahead and set the record straight on this. If anybody doubts what I'm telling you, and of course we do speak truth here on the podcast, but you feel free to call the Texas Alcoholic and Beverage Commission, and they'll confirm this information with you. But I'm going to go ahead and explain something that seems to be the biggest confusing situation that we have with some of this gun signage law across the state. You can find this blue and white sign generally on every door of a liquor store in Texas, unless it's been taken down. And it has to be taken down by an agent of the Texas Alcoholic and Beverage Commission. Employees of the establishment, the owner of the establishment cannot legally take the sign down. It's a $10,000 fine if they get caught removing that sign. Okay. But let me explain what this sign is. These blue and white signs were distributed from TABC, again, the Texas Alcoholic Beverage Commission. When license to carry first was became implemented into law, and what that blue and white sign basically said was that if you are unlicensed, you cannot come in the doors of the establishment, that it was a felony, which was a third degree. You could serve anywhere from 2 to 10 years in the penitentiary and up to a $10,000 fine. It was the unlicensed possession uh, of the person. Now that constitutional carry is in force in Texas and has been for several years, if the business establishment, and we're getting back to these alt signs again, ladies and gentlemen, if those alt signs are not posted at the front door, then can you legally, as an unlicensed carrier, a constitutional carrier, can you walk in that business with a gun on your person? Yes, you can. And I know this is confusing, but the Texas Alcoholic and Beverage Commission uh, invalidated those signs when constitutional carry was passed only for the only sole purpose, again, that liquor store is privately owned. So it overrode the existing law that's already in place that says you have to be licensed to come in. No, you do not, unless they post again 30 6, 30 7. So technically, it would be like in the Gunsmoke TV series. You could walk into the saloon with a gun on and purchase your alcohol. I know, folks, that that is confusing. We did contact the Texas Alcoholic Beverage Commission headquarters in Austin and asked them about those signs. And they told us that indeed those blue and white signs are not valid because open carry was passed, and they themselves, the agents of TABC that visit those stores on normal or local routes, whatever they're doing, to inspect their licenses, to make sure they're valid, to make sure they're in compliance. They're not selling to minors. They're running sting operations, things of that such. That because a TABC law enforcement officer posted those signs inside the establishment, that only a licensed TABC officer can take those signs down. So basically, what I'm saying is if you are the owner of an establishment, and not just a liquor store, it can be a beer, wine, or distilled spirits. If you remove that sign from your place of business, it is a criminal offense. Now, I didn't take the time to ask TABC what the criminal offense was, what it would constitute, and all of that rigmarole. Okay. All they told us is that they put it up, they have to take it down, and it's going to take a while for this to happen Texas statewide. There are so many liquor stores, there are so many beer stores, there are so many wine stores across the state that it's just going to take some time for the TABC to make their entire round across the whole state of Texas and begin removing these signs. Now, the way it used to be, because that blue and white sign was posted, and again, folks, remember, this is pre constitutional carry days. This is only when you could carry if you were licensed. If you walked in that place, and it didn't matter if the beer was sectioned off somewhere, the wine was sectioned off, or if it was a straight up liquor store, you could not go through the front doors. It was a felony. But because constitutional carry was passed in Texas, now it goes back to signage. Again, those liquor stores, those beer stores, those wine outlets, they are those are private property owned businesses. It's on private property. So therefore, they have to post those signs to restrict legally someone from coming into that place of establishment. So if it's a full blown liquor store and you are concealed carry, you are openly carried, and you're constitutionally carrying, you are not committing an offense, you are not committing a felony by going in that business, as long as those signs are not posted. We're going back 30 out 6, 30 out 7. In that case, it would constitute up to a Class A misdemeanor, depending on the circumstances. And the way that works, maybe you forgot you had it on. You walked in there. They said, hey, you got a gun on. You need to leave. You go right out the door. You comply with their request. It's a Class C misdemeanor if they want to push it. If you say, no, I'm only going to be in here for you. In other words, if you refuse to leave, it becomes a Class A misdemeanor. And again, that gets back to what I was talking about earlier as your behavior. So if you walked in that place and they told you, hey, you need to get out of here, you got a gun on, there's a sign posted, and you said, well, whatever. They call the police, cops show up, you're still there, you're looking at two charges. Okay. You're looking at unlawfully carrying of a weapon because you did not leave the establishment and there was a sign posted prohibiting you from coming into that. So you would be looking at a Class A misdemeanor for refusal to leave a bioweapon carrier. You would also be an additional charge could be added for unlawfully carrying of a weapon. And in closing, I want to just quickly bring this up, especially to the licensed carriers out there. Most licensed carriers, if not all, already know this. But if you are arrested, it's a Class B or a Class A misdemeanor. Of course, naturally, if it's a felony, you're going to lose your license if you're convicted. And you're charged and convicted with unlawfully carrying of a weapon or a DWI, anything above a Class C, uh, you're going to lose your license to carry for 5 years. Okay, and then you can be reinstated on that. This does not apply to someone that is constitutionally carrying because you don't have a license to start off with. Theoretically, yes, you could be charged with unlawfully carrying of a weapon, which is a Class A misdemeanor. And because it's only a misdemeanor conviction, yes, you could legally still carry a weapon on your person. It would also apply to an individual that lost their license to carry. They could constitutionally carry as well. And they would say, well, to hell with it. They pull my license for 5 years. It doesn't matter. I can constitutionally carry. So I think a lot of that came. Austin wasn't really thinking about that when they passed that gun law of open carry. But this kind of gives you an idea. You got to watch for the signage. It also applies to private property homeowners. Let's say that you have an entrance gate to your property. You can also post 30-06, 30-07. You can restrict anyone from coming on your property, concealed, openly carried. You cannot restrict them if they are carrying concealed in a motor vehicle. That does not apply to them. As long as it's concealed in the glove box, the console, or whatever, they just couldn't get out of their vehicle with it on their person, whether concealed or openly. And let me bring this real quick point up because we're almost out of time here. We're up to 58 minutes now. One other place that is prohibited, and I want to bring this up, and it concentrates strictly on Huntsville, the seat of Walker County, and it's the law only applies on the date of a scheduled execution. It is a place where weapons are prohibited. You cannot come within 1,000 foot of the building where the scheduled execution is to take place the day of the scheduled execution. Any other time, yeah, you can walk on the public sidewalks and this, that, and the other. But on the date of a scheduled execution at death row in Huntsville, Texas Department of Criminal Justice, you cannot come within 1,000 foot of the building that houses where the execution is going to take place. So keep that in mind. If you happen to, be protesting an execution or something like that, Huntsville police do enforce that. They will put you in jail for that. And it also, you would be looking at a separate offense of unlawfully carrying of a weapon in addition to the felony that you're going to be charged with for coming within 1,000 foot. Hopefully, this clears up everything that can be cleared up about where you can carry and where you cannot carry here across the Great Lone Star. And, folks, with that being said, that will wrap it up for this Friday edition of the Alan Fitz podcast, also known as The Chat. We do invite you to go to my webpage. That is alanfitz.com. And you can visit that page. You can scroll down that page. It will have information of upcoming podcasts that we are projecting to do. It will also take you to the link to my YouTube channel, which incidentally is youtube.com/at symbol, Alan Fitz Podcasting. We do keep that updated as well. At the bottom of the alanfitz.com webpage, you can find our social media links. We do keep those pages updated, especially X, which is the former Twitter. And we also we try to keep LinkedIn updated, but sometimes I kind of forget about that. But also checking that YouTube page, we also as well update the following Monday, which is like today's Friday. This upcoming Monday, we will post the upcoming podcast as well. Now, those pictures that you see that are on alanfitz.com, a lot of times those are good, but sometimes we do change up. So you'll have to check the page periodically to see the updates. And always, as I said, you can go to x.com, Alan Fitz Podcasting, if you're a Twitter user as well. With that being said, that will wrap up this Friday edition of the chat. Again, thank everyone for tuning in to the show today. And until we meet again next Friday, as always, this is Alan Fitz saying have a great weekend. Bye for now.